right into it. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to 22 Panels. We're starting almost in media res. Stephan Franck has returned. Dan Newland and Sean Harklerode are here to grill him about Palomino because we did it in the book club, but we were actually just talking the spirit, and I decided that we had to hit record before we talked any more wonderful stuff about Will Eisner's The Spirit without like saving it for posterity. So, hi guys. Go ahead, Dan, with whatever you were going to say.
Putting me on the spot. You were talking about how you discovered heavy metal, and that's sort of where you got interested in animation, or the
Hmm.
idea that you could do it. Had you seen like the Metal Hurlant and some of the things that were the French edition of that, or did you get into heavy metal from the American side first, essentially?
No, so like until that movie. So first I was into because before we were recording, we were talking about like my parents' store, right? So they had the comics, but they also had because my dad had a photo studio in the basement, so everything that was related to photo, film, whatever was also happening there, and so he was selling
Your
the
parents' store just sounds cool as fuck.
coolest fuck.
Comics,
You know
books,
what I do? I would
cigarettes,
come back from
photography.
yeah, I would come back from school, and you know how like in libraries you have like those ladders to go to the higher like shelves and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I
Right.
would I was a little kid, I would climb on there, find an empty like cubby hole in and I would like sit there at the top corner of the store with my stash of comics, and I would read from there while I'd be monitoring the store like I'm a fucking like security camera. Uh,
I, I mean, I love that you got into comics and animation, but I think that if I'd had your parents in their store, I like never would have left the family business because after a certain age, you just wouldn't have been able to get me out the door.
well, the family business left me. That's the problem. So, but anyways, right? So he was selling Super 8 millimeter reels of the Disney animated movies,
Oh
right?
man.
So I would bring them home and project them like I had something with climbing on top of stuff. So I would climb up my like bookshelf and from there would project like the film against the wall, and I'd be completely entranced by the like Jungle Book, all that stuff, like the all the Milk Call animation. I mean, it's just I didn't know Milk Call back then, but it was just
Right.
completely magic to me. So I was always in love with the art form of animation, but I was also but not so much with the stories. I was more interested with the stories we were telling in comics, and also in love with the art form. But you know what I'm saying? Like just in terms of sensibility, I was more pulled in this direction. But then the magic of animation was also, so I did both growing up, and completely forget your question. I'm sorry.
No, just I was interested.
I
Well,
think
by
that
Oh,
everything.
answered
yeah,
whatever
no, yeah, yeah.
questions we might
So
have
yes,
had.
But yeah, I mean, a lot of there was a lot of great French stuff going on at that point as well. Were you
yes.
influenced as much by that then, or was you really more entranced by the American comics? And that was what the
Did
Oh,
you discover Mobius before watching the movie?
yes. So
Okay.
until so yes, as in yes, I remember your question, and but the answer is no. What I mean is that until I found that crate of books at the distributor's, warehouse when I was with my mom, right? Um, I was solely into just the regular comics, like the American comics and the French kids comics. Your
Absolutely.
Lucky Luke
Lucky
was
Luke,
my favorite.
Tintin.
Tintin, you name it, Asterix also, although I was less of an Asterix. Like the whole, the Smurfs, all that stuff.
you know
Anyways, so but then when I found,
Ah, that's where your love for the Smurfs started.
yeah,
You
and
directed a Smurfs movie.
I did. But then when when I found those books of the spirit, they are published by humanoid
okay.
associé, as they were called back then, right? Which
Mhm.
is the publishing company that used to do Metal Hurlant. So because of the spirit, I was like, hey, who's publishing this stuff? And that brought me to more of their books. And then I really became aware because like it was a family store, right? So the material had to be arranged around the store by my dad by dangerousness, right? So all the comics that were like okay for kids were like at kids level. They were like again, by the door and stuff like your Spider-Man, your Superman, all that stuff. But then there were the comics that were considered dangerous, and they were like printed in black and white, smaller. And I'm talking stuff like the original Deathpool or no, Death. Wait, why am I blanking on his name? The Rich Butler. You know what I mean? Deathstroke, Deathpool.
Nope.
No, not Death. Fuck, why is it? I'm so stuck on the French name because they had French crazy names. But um, he's a cyborg. RoboCop's inspired by it. Deathlock.
Oh yeah.
Deathlock.
Thank
Sure.
you. Deathlock. So all that stuff was higher, so kids couldn't reach. So it was on this completely other shelf. It was next to like the pulp novels and semi-porn stuff people read on the train and whatnot, right? And then you had magazines, you had the news mags, and then you had the dangerous magazines. So you had the porn, the blah, 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 and Metal Hurlant was right next to the porn.
I mean,
Not go there, right?
so you had the advantage of having the family store, but the
Yeah.
disadvantage of having parents who knew exactly what was in all of those comics. Because when
We
I could
knew
bring home an Epic Illustrated or a Heavy Metal or whatever, it was just a comic book pretty much to my parents, unless there was something
that's right.
crazy on the cover. So they never
Yeah.
questioned any of this, you know. I was when did American Flag came out? Like I would have been 12 or 13 when
81
that
or
came out.
2. Yeah.
I should not have been reading that, but I had all of them
Yeah,
because,
yeah, yeah.
you
There you
know,
go. There you go. They didn't know any better.
you know,
So, but so that's when I discovered with the movie, then the movie, right? Just like, okay,
you know.
and I had this huge collection of Metal Hurlant, and guess what? When I moved all my books, that you can see a lot of them in the back here, but some of them I've had for decades, which I'm not gonna say on air how many decades, but the point is, everything,
1 decade. You're
yeah.
12. You're very precocious.
Yeah. So one box didn't make it. And
Oh,
that's the box that had all my Metal Hurlant. And that had all the Dupuis. Well, there was like two. I mean, there was a few historical. They're still around. Publishers in France like Dargaud, Dupuis, whatever. And Dupuis had those amazing soft cover books that are considered like the holy grail of that era. And all my soft cover Dupuis books also didn't make it. They got lost somewhere.
oh
Uh,
no.
Sure. So I'm very sad for those.
Hopefully there was some very, very
Mhm.
happy baggage claim handler somewhere that discovered them years later rather than them just getting destroyed or anything like that. I want to at least believe that they found a good home.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes they do. I have from Chicago. I had a fun baggage claim story from Chicago. One year I was doing C2E2, and and so because I was also doing this show in Montreal at the time. I was traveling sometimes to Montreal and from LA, and so I had to take whatever. So like the thing happened that instead of going straight from home to C2E2, I flew through Montreal, and then we changed the tickets. Long story short, at the end of C2E2, I've only a few books left, with me and whatever, and I go to the airport. Turns out my plane ticket had been canceled because of all the shenanigans of changing planes or whatever. Long story short, uh, I'm like desperate because I have to be in LA like the next morning. I don't want to buy another ticket either and stuff like that. And the lady saves my ass. She goes, "Hey, I can put you on the seat that, like those jumper seats that like when the host,
Mhm.
the flight attendants, just fly, you can, but here's the trick. You can only one bag, just one bag. And, so I had to and I had two bags because I had a few books I was bringing back. So I'm cramming everything into the one bag. And then there's some books that was silver at the time, some trays of silver that I just didn't know what to do with. And I said, well, I'm giving them to you because, and she's like, oh, my husband loves comics. Maybe I'll just give them. I was like, yeah, do please. Here's a bunch of books. So fast forward the following year, I'm back at C2E2. This guy makes a beeline to the booth and goes like, "Hey, you're probably not gonna remember her, but you met my wife at the airport last year because you give her." And dude, she saved my ass. I will remember her forever. Uh, but he was like, "I love the book. Give me the other book." So sometimes there's like little messages in bottles, and it finds,
That's
Well, your
awesome.
books are addictive too.
oh, thanks.
At least I find them addictive. Dan finds them addictive.
I
Sean
do.
finds them mildly addictive.
Well,
We should probably talk about them a little bit, actually.
I was about to segue into that. So why don't we talk a little bit of Palomino because it's all done. It's all been shipped out.
yeah.
So I can say spoiler alert. They're all available if you haven't read
661
them.
pages.
What?
651. That's right. It's
So
a lot of pages.
so many good pages. Like
Well,
as
here's the thing, right? Like, um, so as I was saying earlier, I did comics and animation growing up. That was my, thing. But animation took over for me. Like just when I started animation school was when Who Framed Roger Rabbit came out, and that changed the industry completely. And now there was, the opportunity to work on a lot of really cool stuff. So I kind of embarked in comics, but the thing that had really like because comics were, like the sort of Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Iron Man, where everything to me, Daredevil, when I was, all the way to 13, 14, once I found heavy metal hurlant, right? And then at that point, I got more into Corbin, Moebius, all that stuff. And so, but then between animation and also music and stuff like that, I'd kind of, by the time I was in college, I had like, not lost interest, but lost touch a little bit with comics. And that's when Dark Knight Returns, the Watchmen, the Sienkiewicz stuff, the Howard stuff, all those. And I was reading that stuff and I was like, holy fuck. The great American novel was the stuff I used to love when I was 10. I'm obsessed now. And so, uh, um, so then I embarked on this career in animation, but 15 years ago I was like, hey, don't forget you also want to do the comics. And so I started doing comics, and but immediately, maybe unwisely, but I was like, hey, I want to try to tackle the big graphic novels. I want to try to do the immersive tome that you can sit for 5 hours on your, it's just like, and so that's why Silver is like 500 pages and Palomino is 600 something pages. And this, but there's something about that form of storytelling that I think I find really fascinating. And of course, I like short things too. Like I have short things. The next thing I'll do in comics will be a very short thing because I don't have it in me to commit to another 6 years on something, but
well, your interim short thing was awfully good too. The love story, love
yes,
in the time of the space god.
So thank you. Sometimes it's like it's just a primal scream that just comes out. And I just remember growing up, reading like, Stephen King, and sometimes you read his like 700 page, novels, and sometimes you read his short stories. And there's a form and an art to all of them that is lovely.
Everybody's tongue tied. Somebody say something.
Yeah. So what was so did you spend 6 years on Palomino? Like one a year basically? Or
Yes, something like this, although it's because it's a complex story, right? I mean, there's all those threads that need to tie together and stuff like that. And so it's not something you can really improvise one book at a time, right? So I knew roughly where I wanted to go. I had the ending in mind, a version it ended up changing, as you know, but the ending in mind. So I had my destination. I knew where north was. But I wrote and drew the first book. And then I was like, all right, now I need to I'm really getting into like act two, if you will, right? So I really need to get my shit together, right? So I wrote and drew in one stretch two and three. And then when I was done with three, I was like, all right, now we're on the B side. So everything, so I wrote it out all the way to the end, and I laid it out all the way to the end, the three books. And then I started like, tying them down and stuff. So that's what I did, four and five. So one came out, then two and three together. That was the biggest gap, because it took me a long time to write two and three, and also because I was at my busiest on some other project, and so, but I still get through it, so it took almost 3 years to get two and three out, and then four, five, six, four and five took a couple of years, and then less than a year later, I had six, because at that point it was already written, it was already laid out. All I had to do is finalize the drawings. So it's a little irregular in its release, um, but so it's pretty interesting. Like I find that if I'm in the middle of a show, like for instance, when I was working on What If, I was on there for almost 4 years, but I was still averaging, once the book is written and laid out, I was still averaging 5 pages a week, at the same time as I was doing the show. So that was pretty good. And then, like last year, I was like, all right, I need to finish this series. So I put animation a little bit to the side. I just took some freelance gigs, but focused really on the book. And then I can see how fast I can go when if I'm just doing just that. And then it took me just a few months, just like maybe 4 months to draw and color the book. But again, the layout's done already.
How long do the layouts take? Because I know for some artists, the layouts are the
For me,
almost the most time consuming.
no, for me it's faster
Okay.
because you know because of the other stuff. I've done tons of storyboarding in my time. And so the ability to tell the story, to create the continuity. That to me, and especially since its layouts, the drawings aren't super formulated necessarily, so they're enough so I get the vibe and I get the emotion and I get the point and the energy, but they're not final drawings so that doesn't stop me. And so I can go pretty fast. I can, do real layout, maybe like maybe 8 pages a day, something like that. That includes, blocking in the CGI that I use for the sets or whatever. So I go pretty once I writing takes takes a lot of time, and not write like it's just finding the take, right? Like I wrote Palomino like three different ways before I figure like, okay, this is the version I'm telling, right? So sometimes you have the high concept, but the theater of it is kind of escaping you exactly,
Right.
and then you're like, okay, so there were, so I think if I've learned something in the storytelling sort of business is not to be precious about the stuff, it's not about is it a good idea or bad idea, it's just is it the right idea, is this what this
Right.
is really about, right? And so I had a couple of takes on Palomino that I thought were cool, but they were not really getting to the core of what this was about. And then so I, Palomino is a high concept that I, just the high concept of, hey, it's a neo-noir that takes place in LA in the late 70s or early 80s, around the Palomino Club. And it's, a window on that way of life, on that time period, on the end of the American century and the beginning of this, all that stuff, right? I had that high concept for a long time, but for 20 years. But then I didn't know what it was until I decided to move forward with it, and then at that point, it still took me a year and a half to crack the take, Then once I have the take, when I can hear the voices of the characters in my head and I can see what it is, then it becomes improv in slow motion, But you know what I'm saying?
So this might explain why it sometimes seemed like, especially when I was reading the stuff that's in the first time period, like the 70s,
Yeah.
I felt like there were so many untold stories. Like,
Hmm.
like somewhere you've got a Silmarillion hidden away that's just going to be all of these other stories finally to come out. Like
Yeah.
characters like Stu. Stu does not seem to me like a guy who should only be in two scenes or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
he's so well developed as a character. Was he in more of this in some of these different things or
No, but I'm gonna say something I've never said publicly before. There's two other
oh,
arcs of Palomino that exist in my head. And some of the things that are unresolved in the first arc are seed planted for these two other arcs. So there you go. Thank you. Uh,
fantastic.
the thing that we'll say though, is it's really hard, right? Because like when you discover something when you're 10 years old, or like like me discovering the spirit, or like movies, like when I saw Blade Runner when I was 14, like stuff hits you
Hmm.
that age, let alone back in a time where there was a lot less content, to use that word, out there, than it does now. So sometimes, so this is my caveat to say that something, many times, we're like, oh, this didn't hit me like when I first saw the first Star Wars when I was 5 years old, right? Yeah, nothing's ever gonna hit you like that, right? But
Yep.
so that is true, right? But that being said, I do feel like movies felt bigger when I was a kid.
Hmm.
I think like a lot of movies now, even big movies, it's like this one thing happens, second thing happens, three things happen, and like you feel like the whole thing happened in 2 days and it's gone. And it's just like, whereas you went to see like those movies of the, 70s, 80s, whatever, you felt like you were entering an entire world, right? There was an art to making the world feel very, very big.
Yeah.
And I thought long and hard about what my personal theory is to, why that is. And I think it's because the, the old movies understood that, when you live in the world, right? There's stuff that your window, your interface, your window in the world is narrow, and you hear stuff that you overhear, that you see, about,
Hmm.
but it's not in your field of vision. It's like you'll never, oh, you heard. terms that you don't know what they mean, or somebody mentions something in the conversation and you understand it in passing, and but you'll never know what that really was, and you just let it go. It's fine. You just accept that the world is bigger than you. And so, in other words, the story to me, to feel lived in, to feel real, to feel like it has scale, needs to exist outside the confines of the borders of the frames, of the panels, of the borders of the story, and even outside of the sphere of awareness of the characters or their field of understanding, right? And so that's why, and sometimes the non-resolve, because it's funny, like when I was a kid, or like when I was a young person, I had this kind of fantasy that one day at the end of my life, all roads will have led to Rome, that everything will be tied together, blah, 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 blah. And as get older, you realize that, oh no, a lot of shit is going sideways, and this will never connect with that, and I'm never getting good again with this person. And, what I mean? Like so, and so I like that in story. Like for instance, there's this subplot with Sherry Joe and her father.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna spoil it for people who haven't read it, want to read it, but the point, we know what it is, right? And so he's looking for somebody. He's looking for a person, and we set it up in the story almost like, oh, this is going to be a thread, right? And then that thread get interrupted, and they'll never get their answers. And then when they meet again by chance, 20 years later, she's like, hey, have you ever found that person? And she's like, never found that person. Maybe someday somebody will. And that to me is what makes story lifelike.
That is fascinating because we talked about that, and it's intriguing because thinking about it, there are a number of times where I think when you're watching modern movies, reading modern stuff, the protagonist is so much the center that you
Right.
don't even imagine that the camera might follow somebody else out of the room.
Yeah.
And I think there are times in here where you've got characters who are magnetic enough, even as secondary, tertiary characters. I wouldn't mind following them out of the room instead of the people I'm supposed to, you know?
Yeah.
And that really, I mean, it bothered me that we didn't find out. We talked about it on the podcast, that we didn't find out what was going with some of those cases, that he's just a detective. And
Yeah.
the whole conceit of a detective is they solve stuff.
Yeah.
And then he dies unexpectedly and stuff doesn't get solved. And that's a
Yeah.
brave storytelling decision,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, and I'll get to that one because it really kind of imposed itself on me when I least expected it. But to your point, I think the way we're talking about short story, long stories, right? The short stories, what I like about that is that it's like a small window on a big world, right?
Mhm.
Like, a good short story is not a short window on a small world. It's a very tiny little bit window. So you can have a short story that ends up on an open ending, and an open that can finish open-ended. Um, but like the idea is that you want to feel like it's a small window on the bigger world. But the thing is that as you get into bigger stories, the window can never be big enough to see the whole world. Because if you do that, then your world now is going to feel very, very small and very, very fake.
Wow.
Very cool.
I've never heard it expressed in that way, but it's a
Hmm.
great way of looking at it.
So,
And to go to the, like the idea of, so spoiler alert, right? Um, when I first conceived Palomino in its actual form, not the previous takes, the idea was that uh, it all takes place in 1981, and when there's the big thing that happens at the end of volume 3, the idea was he wakes up the next morning at the hospital, or like 2 weeks
Mhm.
later, whatever, he's in a coma for 2 weeks, whatever. And then you do that super tropey scene where she's like, Dad, you scared the fuck out of me. And he's like, she's like, if you do this again, I'll kill you myself. And and it was always going to be an idea that at the end she retraces her mom's steps, through like the Malibu experience and stuff like that. But he was going to be around, and then like actually the original idea was that she was going to save him, right, at the end. Um, but then I do 1, 2, 3. I write 1, 2, 3. I draw 1, 2, 3. I release 1, 2, 3, and then I'm now like, okay, now I need to write 4. And no matter how I started to write that hospital scene where he wakes up, well, yeah, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. There's no way he survived this. There's bullshit. And it started to occur to me that, oh my God, no, he did die. And then all of a sudden it became also obvious to me that she was the main character. And I didn't know it when I did it, but we start with her as a child, as a very, very strong person who has a very strong want in the story, which is to find out what happened to her mom and then her dad and then everything else. But it's set up from the get-go. And first, I thought it was like a quirky, cool way to lead to him. But guess what? It was always going to lead to her. And that also, um, so on the meta level, the let's not forget that, so this is based around the Palomino Club, right? Like 1981, Reagan just walks into the White House. It's the beginning of like a thing. But it's the end, like, the 80s are the place where the 50s came to die, right? So it's like this end of this American century. And the Palomino was not going to go too deep into the Palomino because I could talk about just the Palomino for hours. But um, the benchmark, the high point of it wasn't around that time, 1981, from late 70s to early, 1980, 1981. And then it started to go down, and then it closed in 1995. So the idea that we had these two sides of the story with this 15-year gap of, and since we're using Palomino as our motif for the world, as the American century, the American culture, if you will, and that, so we have the high points, and then we have when it closed for business, and then transformed into and it became this thing where, um, he dies with his world. And when we find her again now, she's 29, so it's 1995, so she has the agency of being that age. And she's a journalist, but she works for one of those, if you guys remember those, like those free weeklies that you had everywhere that are basically
Mhm.
paid by the porn ads or the prostitution ads in the back. But meanwhile, in the front, it's like gonzo journalism, hard hitting, stuff. And so she works for one of those places, and it feels like, well, she's part of that new world because 1995, right, is the dawn of the digital age. Well, I mean, those places didn't know, right, that in a few short years they were going to be put out of business by a Craigslist,
Right.
right? So like it became this thing about time passing, right? About the fact that if in 1979 you've gone to the Palomino and American culture and blah 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 and go like, this is going to change at some point or end or whatever, people would have gone, you're insane. This is going to be 1,000 years of this, right? Guess what? And then you go to 1995. Oh, look, we have the Web 1.0. This is crazy, blah blah blah. Yeah, this is gonna last forever. Yeah, 10 years later, not even 5 years later, it's over, right? And then start over something new. So it became a thing about change, and became a thing about the fact that everything goes, everything must go. And so in the world where like cultures, political systems, I mean, right? Nothing that you can no, you can take people, you can't take anything, anyone for granted. Everything must leave, right? But so in that current movement, what's the true north? What's the step, the points that's unmovable? What is the, or the, not maybe unmovable, but what is the through line? What is the thread? And I think it's the moral choices that some people make, right? Like this idea of, fighting for justice and whatever, and just, not going along to get along, whatever, like that sort of spirit of resistance against what you know is wrong, even when that's a problem for you. Uh, that at the end of the day, that's all that remains. And so that's what this is in a way about.
We've gotten too good at describing this. Also, I've fallen down the rabbit hole because Dolly Parton passed away today, so I'm trying to figure out if she ever played the Palomino.
Oh, yes, he did.
Eh,
I know he did because I've seen some posters.
Yeah, I'm seeing conflicting reports. But in my Google search, I did come across Comic Watch, Dark Planet Comics debut Palomino cover, and all new preview by Stephan Franck from May
Oh,
11th,
that guy.
2020.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty funny. Like, as all good stories, you know what the plot is going to be, but the meaning of it sort of reveals itself in the and also, I mean, there's a lot of different layers we can get into, right? Like, but just on the, like, the personal character layer, is that, I mean, it's a story that's about, because it's about that transmission of the passing of the torch. I always said that, you grow up, you're born, and you become sentient, and you feel like the main character in the story of your life. And then one day you have kids, if you do, and they feel like secondary characters in the movie of Yuri. And then one day they're like around the age, they're 14, 15, you're just the driver, and you realize you're not part of the conversation that's happening in the back, and you realize, holy shit, now I'm a secondary character in the story of their life. That's who and that's a very, very, very hard transition to make for anyone in real life, right? That's what Snow White is about, right? Like,
Right.
I just remember, like, when all my kids are adults now, but I just remember my oldest, when he was in high school, and I just remember, just driving him to high school one morning, and he's like, hey, just, I'll get off here, right? So, like, okay, whatever. And first, no conversation in the car or whatever, right? And so he gets out of the car, out of the car, and then I watch him go talk to his friends, I'm at the red light, waiting, to go to work, and I'm watching him, and I see, oh man, they're all, look at him and his friends, they're all young and beautiful. But I was overwhelmed by this feeling that, and they have their entire life ahead of them. Their life is an open book. And the next feeling that I had was, fuck that guy. Because there's an intense feeling of jealousy that even in the most loving parent will, like, becoming a secondary second banana in the story of somebody else's life when you used to be the main guy is hard for everyone. That's the witch in Snow White, right? So I I thought it was so I think it was something interesting in terms of, him being the hero then, but she's already a teenager, so she's already giving him a run for his money and stuff like that. And I thought that was the story, but then I realized that's not what the story is. the story, well, that's only half of the story. So we have that story from his point of view, but then there's a little bit of my own, because I'm, as a parent, I've had that story. But as a child, my dad passed away when I was very young. And so what happens when I was 8? So what that means is that you're still seeing, especially if they're a big personality, and um, you see all these artifacts, all those, you hear those stories and stuff and the person you've lost becomes this mythical person. This not a mythical, this mythical figure, but not quite a person because you are too young to know them as a person. And guess what? They're half your DNA and probably 80% of your, nurture, right? So, which means that part of yourself, part of you is a mystery to yourself. And so I think for her, she lost her mom, then she loses her dad. There's this part of her like, who am I? What is the like, so she knows she has a certain legacy as like daughter of a detective. She's clearly is that type of a person. Even her friend tells her when she's a kid, but um, but who is she really? She doesn't know, right? And then you have the other thing also that when you do lose a parent, then you become suddenly aware that it is a possibility, and also you're running out of spare, right? So you go like anytime the car doesn't come to the driveway, on time, you go, oh, here's the car. Okay. So I was really, and like for instance, that scene at the end of book 3 when she, falls asleep, like reading the files she shouldn't be reading, right? And then she's like, she falls asleep. It's dark, and then there's lights in the driveway, and she goes, "Oh shit, is he right?" So to me, that's a moment that was played from my own memory of after my dad was gone, and it was, again, it was with my mom, and we're like, well, it happened once, could happen twice, you never know. And like this always look like around the time when the car's supposed to pull into the driveway, you can't help but check the window and see if a car's coming. So that became her story and her kind of breaking through to the other side of that, of becoming an adult, of letting go of the past, letting go of backstories. Because that's something else that we're talking about big theories about story. Like one of the biggest thing that makes movie feel small and bullshit is backstories, right? Where you have to feel like, but good movies don't have backstories, right? Like, do you know why Dirty Harry is the way he is, right? Like, was his dad mean? Was his dad super nice? Was his dad killed by who gives a fuck, right? Doesn't matter. Well, what's happening? Are
What
you guys?
one of those names is not like the others.
Oh, I think he's sharing.
Oh,
I'm
there you
sharing a
go.
picture. What one of those names is not like the others.
Yeah. Like which names? Wait,
The
where?
chili peppers, probably.
Red hot chili
Yeah,
peppers.
Oh, there you
It's
go.
not.
Red Hot Chili
Oh,
Peppers
there you
apparently
go.
played
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Palomino,
Yes, that's awesome. And that's that
a noon concert sponsored by K Rock, where a
that's
thousand people showed up for the 264
oh my
capacity
God.
stadium.
Well, and that's the thing that happened like in the late 80s is it started to shift from, just straight up, country western to, punk rock and all that stuff. Um
Oh,
so I don't know, I lost my track. So
Sorry,
no, no, it's
I'll
okay.
stop. I'll stop with
this
my rabbit
this
holes.
this happens around here. You've been here enough times, probably, Stefan, to know that occasionally the train goes out of the station at
Yeah, well, my
odd
train also
times.
goes up the state. So,
That's what we do.
yeah, backstories, right? So the why does Dirty Harry, is Dirty Harry? It doesn't matter. What matters, he only exists as an actor, Sean, right? It's the dramatic form. It's just there's a goal, doesn't go your way, you try again. That's everything exists through that principle. And so but I think in life, we all get hung up with our backstories, with our parents, with whatever is the past. But at some point, you're like, but the past doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is the present. What am I going to do with it? That's on me. That's the only thing no one can take away from me, is what I'm going to do tomorrow, right? So she has to get into this delayed adulthood through
Uh,
that sort of ordeal.
I'm also just remembering
So
that we didn't really talk about the last time you and I talked because it hadn't been released yet, and we talked some on the book club about um, she lost her parents, and then she was raised by his old partner
Yeah,
and his wife, only his wife got cancer.
right.
And then she finds out that the partner, spoiler, spoiler, spoiler,
do
was
not go to the
also
next sentence
like,
of what Tad is going to say until you finish the story. Just
right,
stop the
right.
podcast right here and
I
don't
mean,
get
we already
all
told
six
them that
volumes.
earlier, but I'm going to re-emphasize it. Um, but then we find out that the partner like killed her dad, killed her mom, like the partner's
Yeah,
a bad. So like her father, she's not only lost her parents, she's lost two sets of parents, including the second one in like, or the second father in like the worst possible way.
yeah, 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 exactly. The it's funny, like you really like something sometimes do things on instinct. You don't know why. I'm not like I'm talking a lot of theories, but I never think like that when I'm working. I always think after. It's like, oh, what did So but it has to come out first, from the gut, and then you go like, if you've done it long enough, then you start to see, oh, I see what I was doing there, but I didn't know it when I was doing it. But so I always knew that Lori, so Mac's wife, when we find her, she has cancer. Um, I always knew. I just didn't know why. I always knew. And then it became clear to me that in a certain way, it's like, I don't want to say poetic justice, because that's would be completely wrong, a wrong thing to say, but some way karmically, spiritually related to, he's responsible for this nuclear incident, right? That happened, for real, by the way, in the valley, right? Santa Susana
Right.
Pass, that happened, right? 250 times worse than 3 Mile Island, right there in the middle of the valley, right? So that happened. And that's why all the guys who were connected, to it, kind of who cleaned up the thing, they all die of cancer and stuff like that. So the fact that, so they live in the valley and his wife become ill, you'll never know. Again, this is one of those things that you don't want to, if you say it, if then it becomes goofy, right? It's not like, yeah, sure enough, she got cancer because of the radioactive shit. That No, it's not like that. It's more like life. You can't prove it. You don't know. It's just like life has a way to just, everything gets paid in full somehow, somewhere, in ways that you don't understand. You know what I'm saying? So that was a little bit of that. And also, she's the one who feels like she's gotten she's been in touch with her mortality, and with her seeing the end of the road in a way that he hasn't yet. So I don't want to spoil details and stuff like, but that's why she does what she does, because you know she she's like, why are we even trying anymore, right? But he's still on the, and then once that happens, then he goes on this final quest for some sort of absolution, that I think, or like at least to be understood, like he wants to be un you know, not forgiven is too big a word, but he wants to share some of the burden somehow through, her knowing and accepting, and like, I don't know what is, and that's what she tells him, like, I don't know what you're trying to accomplish. Like, she's never gonna forgive him any of this. It's unforgivable. It's too far gone. But he's just shooting for so there you go. And for people who haven't read, and I'm talking cryptically on purpose, so it's just like, it sounds like a whole bunch of mumbo jumbo, but that you guys read it, so you guys know what I'm talking about.
I got to channel Mark for a minute and take us back a little bit, because you were talking about um, or you're talking about layouts being not a time-consuming process for you, in part because of all the storyboards that you've done. And I know if Mark had one big criticism, it had to do with the number of full page or two-page spreads and how that sometimes felt more like storyboards than a comic. Um, I'm going to go on record again that I actually liked that for the pacing, but my question is actually, talk to me about the differences between storyboarding a animation project and laying out a comic, because I know there are similarities, but there are also some pretty big differences.
Yeah,
Um,
it's very different. Um, okay. Um, the the you know the thing that, before I get into that, I just gonna, because I think it's true that there's a very unusual use of double spreads, and it's part of the, sometimes, movies are, you have a John Wick movie and you have an Altman movie, and the Altman movie is not cut like a John Wick movie, right? So if you go see an Altman movie and go like, "Hey man, I just saw John Wick. That shit is moving. Like, how is this not moving the same way?" Because it's a different movie, and nothing wrong with any of them. It's just, it's a different beast, right? So I,
right.
I think like there's a very experimental streak that, like I was saying, I like to experiment with stuff. I like to, uh, you know, push the art, try to push the art form in directions that, and like, so the use of, that are experimental, and the use of the double spread, I'm using it to create this kind of dream state, almost like a dissociative sort of state when you're reading, when you're immersed in it, that sometimes may be successful, sometimes may not be successful, but that's sort of like the one I'm, again, not that I'm intellectualizing it while I'm doing it, but looking back, I think that's what I'm reaching for when I'm doing those. Now, to your question, yes, the two are related in the same way that, like Chuck Jones, that's a quote. I love that quote, so I use it all the time. So if I told you already, just I'm sorry, but Chuck Jones,
Yeah.
was being asked, what should who should someone do to learn to draw? And say, go to the zoo and learn to draw the animals. And the person said, oh, to understand how they're all different. And Chuck would say, no, to understand how they're all the same, right? And it's true. Like, we all come from the same tree of life, right? Like, all the animals, somehow, when you start to see how things are the same, they're all the same, but they're also very different. um, but they're the same. And so, visual storytelling, or storytelling in general, storytelling is storytelling is storytelling is storytelling. So, comic books, laying out comic books, you know, and film, storyboarding for film, are exactly the same, in the same way that a cat and a horse are exactly the same. But there's so the same principle, same type of organs, same functions, it's the same idea, and it's the same logic, but also they're completely different. right? So that's the link between the two. So technically, you have a lot less real estate on a page than you have in a film. And especially it's in the like the brush of time, like the time brush you're painting with is a lot smaller in a movie, right? Like for instance, if you watch a movie like Ocean's 11 or any movie that where you have a heist or some sort of fake out, and then you get to the point where all of a sudden the good guys pull it off and the mark is like, but my money's gone, and all of a sudden you cut to like 15 scenes you've already seen in a movie, but you're seeing like 20 frames of them, right? And just those 20 crucial frames, now you understand all these scenes differently, right? So this very, very, very fine time brush that you get to paint with. um in comics, time feels like it's moving in bigger blocks. You don't have the equivalent of 20 frames, right? That happen. Maybe you can do it one time, but you cannot do, if you were going to show all these 15, then it takes a full page, it takes a full spread. Then it feels like time is passing. You're not in that, right? So comics are showing, it's almost like these photos, like on your iPhone, like those live photos, whatever they call them, that it's not a film, it's not a video, but it's a photo that kind of moves over like a second or two, right? So I think of comic book panels more like those type of moving photos that they show a little bit more time, whereas a frame of film is as small an amount of time as your brain will remember, will process. And so for instance, I'm bringing up that thing with Ocean's 11 because if you read Silver, Silver is Ocean's 11 in Dracula's castle in a certain way, right? So you get to that point where you're like, oh my God, the good guys pull it off. And you have to go back to all those moments and now color them in a different, I mean, it's a black and white book, but you know what I mean? It's like, shine a different light on them so they take on a different meaning. So it was when I started doing it, my first impulse as a filmmaker was to show every scene that like just like you would do in a movie. And then again, you realize, okay, that takes 5 pages or 4 pages, and it completely breaks the flow of the story. So I have to completely merge the words and pictures. So some of these ideas would have been shown but not heard. Some would be, heard. They say show and what was the you have to show not tell. That's not really true. Sometimes you have to tell not show, right? Even in movies, um, but still more than usual. Sometimes comics compared to film, where film is 90% show don't tell, comics is probably more like 50% show and tell, right? Because again, that time brush you're painting with is a little bit broader and not as fine, right? So something will have to come up in the dialogue, so artfully in the dialogue. Some things will have to be said as captions, something, right? So it's never fully visual storytelling, because you will need the text to add that other layer that in a movie will also come across visually, but here you don't have high enough time resolution to fully do it with just a succession of images. The words will have to come into play in a different way. Does that make sense?
Yes,
I
I
have a
think.
follow-up, by the way, to really the first part of your answer. Um, you talk about you're trying to do things differently and the way that the double page spreads work and everything. And one question I had was when you did your Kickstarter, when I was selecting which type of PDF I wanted
Oh yeah.
during the for to download,
Yes,
you
yes,
had
yes.
an option between one up and two up.
Yeah.
What is your preferred format for people to read these books in?
100% two up.
It is.
Because I work, the spread is my unit of storytelling.
That's what I was wondering. Is it seemed to me, and I've got them in one ups because it's I'm used to. I read on my tablet, and as I was reading and as we were talking, and then afterwards, I'm getting ready for this. I'm like, I wonder if within the context of the way you're doing it, you are really expecting really that people are taking in those 2 pages as a single experience and then working through them rather than when you're doing the one-ups that's going to not really work all that well in some ways for what you're trying to do.
That's absolutely right. I have to say, and maybe it's my fault, but I'm not. I mean, I like the digital. I mean, it's great that we can read digital. It's easier to, whatever, But just for me, like when I'm reading a comic book, it's not the same for prose novel, but for a comic book, I feel like I'm never getting the exact full experience if I'm reading digital. I
Yeah.
like to be sitting on the couch with my Palomino mug. Thank you very much. And reading. And so when you have the book open, it's a spread.
You
So I'm reading for this is my reading experience. So I'm drawing for that experience. So that's the optimal, which again, it's not like, and so there was a question, it was really interesting because like I'm sure like the one page up, that's a hotly contested, topic, right? Because there are some people who insist that they want everything full page. So they're like, no, 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 I don't care if it's a spread, just cut it in half, cutting in half. So I had enough people tell me that in a while so that until the last campaign, if you were getting the one up, they were like some of those spreads would be, and most of the spreads do work that way because like the spread, you never have the thing in the
know.
middle, right? You always have a moment, a before and an after. Like the composition always favors one side or the other, right? So even if you do that, you can still read most of the pages. Sometimes it's a problem when the panels go across the 2 pages. Like sometimes I do it a few times where
No.
like the top panels goes all the way across the spread, and then the second panel goes all the way across the spread. But even so, I make sure that the top panel, favors composition on the left, and the bottom panel favors composition on the right. So worst case scenario, you can still always understand what's happening. But enough people then protested against that, then that for this time around, I reprocessed everything. So now if you get your one page up from this campaign, once it's a double spread, then you get the double spread. So it's a bit annoying because it's smaller, so you may have to turn your iPad or whatever.
Right.
But that's ended up being the like the popular demand was that there was this option was what most people wanted. So I did that. But the
That seems to be how most of the digital comics
You and
do
Brian
it
Michael
at this
Bendis are in
point.
good company because all sorts of his stuff, he lays out a lot of his stuff for his artists, and he uses like long horizontals all the
yeah,
Yeah.
time. And back in the day, um, they didn't have all that processed, and it got really confusing on that. But that's okay. That makes sense. So really, get a bigger monitor, or read it this way, or turn them sideways. The two up is the way to just do it when reading your stuff, if you want
for
to do
me,
it right,
two ways of
or get a physical copy and sit there
Physical
with
is
your
ideal.
mom.
But I gotta say, Stefan, I have read my physicals, I think, twice a piece, but I've read the whole thing like 5 or 6 times. So if it weren't for the digital,
yeah,
I'd
no,
only have read it twice.
I'm not knocking digital. I'm just saying it's
I know.
not for because
No.
either well, I guess I don't have an iPad at the moment. I've had iPad over the years. I don't have one right now, so I don't have an iPad. And when I'm working at my desk, so when I am reading for pleasure, I don't want to be in front of my monitor
Yeah,
either,
Right. Right.
So, but I think that you have to embrace sort of like the format and work for the format, right? So like for instance in the old days when they were printing like on comics on toilet paper, you know what I mean, like the big newsprint, inkers had to ink a certain way, otherwise it would not, it would look bad, right? If the lines were
Right.
too fine or whatever.
yeah.
So whatever the medium is, you have to, or the delivery system is. So this is it, that for me, if I was going to go, okay, I'm really going to work for the digital experience, then I would conceive of a scrolly, thing, like because
Right.
then anyone can, on your tablet, on your iPhone, even you can scroll. And to me, why not? It's just a
I mean,
different.
I'll say some of the I mean, the vertical scroll comics that actually embrace the format
Yeah,
rather than formatting themselves to easily be put into print, um, can sometimes be very special.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
So to me, like the page, the concept of the page, which I love I mean, I'm in love with pages. I see
Yeah.
some on your walls back there, that's coming from books, right? This is, if
yeah,
we're
you
like,
work digitally, so I can't buy any pages at Palomino, can I?
no. But the next one, the short story, will
I mean,
be,
if you ever feel like taking one of the music scenes and just printing it up really, really high quality,
well,
you got
yeah,
my address.
okay. Um, Yeah, no, so that I think you have to embrace the format, and
Yeah.
like if I do something for digital, then I really with digital in mind, then I'll abandon the idea of the page and I'll embrace the concept of the
Have
scroll.
you thought about doing that?
No.
No,
Good. I love the page. I mean,
I do too. I'm
we
just,
tried to find like, John Sable's to get or whatever elsewhere, and I still schlepped out to my garage and grabbed
Yeah.
my box of First Comics, and it's a pain
well,
in the
I'm just,
but I
I
love
don't
it.
know. Did any of you read Scott? And it's just about to get a new edition. Scott McCloud's follow-up to Understanding Comics was called Reinventing Comics,
Yeah.
Oh,
and digital comics were in their absolute infancy at the time. So he wrote about them, but he wrote about their possibilities more than like their realities. And one of the things that he wrote about that I haven't really seen is the idea of the infinite canvas. That if you had a digital comic, you could, if you were so inclined, create something that went as
Just
far
goes
as you
forever.
wanted in all directions.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like that
exactly.
big thing of the Mississippi River that they took around back in Twain's Day or whatever.
Right.
The full painting and just
You
rolled it up
know.
on big things and took it around.
Yeah.
Well, and I think if any of you read, is it Jason Shiga that does like the choose your own adventure type comics, where you like
Yeah.
follow a path and then
Mhm.
you have to pick which page to go to from there and follow a path and sometimes follow back. I mean, with an infinite canvas, you could do some really convoluted and fascinating storytelling
Yeah.
where people had choices of which direction. I
And
mean,
then it becomes a different form, a
it
different
is.
form. It
Not
becomes more
necessarily.
of
Yep.
a game, a participatory kind of thing, and stuff like that,
Right.
which is not the tradition that I work in. It just
Yeah.
so you
No,
know.
I wasn't necessarily pitching it to you as
No,
much as
no,
thinking
no.
out loud.
No,
So,
it's great.
so
It's like games, right? I've never gotten into games, and to me, they're completely valid
Yeah.
art form, or, storytelling
mhm.
on its own. If it's just not something I've
I
ever.
think I'd be more likely to get into them if they required no skill. If they were just choose your own adventure games rather
Once
than
every like decade, a new
must press
Civilization
the
game comes
button
out,
at the right time.
and I'm addicted to Civilization for a week, and then I'm done. So
Yeah, no, I do that too. But
Yeah.
mostly I just get addicted to baseball.
there you go. So Stefan, you had talked about something, and I think Tad sort of riffed on it as well. but that idea of rereading and the like. And one of the things you said was you don't do backstory
No.
in the comics, right?
Yeah.
And I can see that because we're just dropped right in. We don't know why this guy is where he is, what happened to his wife, really. Some of that we get later on as it goes through.
Yeah. Right.
But you also obviously are in love with this place and time, with the idea of the Palomino and all of this. You've got a lot of backstory in the back matter, even though you don't put it into the panels.
Right.
So I feel like you still wanted us to really experience the Palomino in the comic, but then learn about it as well so that we know more about it. And then
Yeah,
when I go
Dan
back
was
on
all over
reread,
your back matter. I mean,
I love the those back pages.
yeah,
yeah.
that's fascinating stuff, talking to like the daughter and all of this. But
Yeah.
I think that really feeds into the next times you read it too. The Palomino then really does become more of a living place because you know more about it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then it's fun to see now that you reread and you go like, oh, I see what's happening there. And I didn't need to know that to follow the story. But guess what? The world extends beyond the confines of the page, which is what I was talking about
Exactly.
earlier. Um, yeah, I mean, here's the so like my other great passion in life is music. And the thing that yeah, so I grew up doing comics and animation and music. And in fact, I had this fork in the road, like, after like midway through college or whatever, where like, um, should I be a professional musician or should I be a professional, doing animation and comics and whatever,
Is
right?
this where you're going to tell me that Johnny Cash and Don Bluth called on the same day and offered you jobs?
No, no, no. Never met either of those gentlemen. However, the music that I loved was uh, uh, country, I started with rockabilly, and since you've read the back matter, but that got me into country rock. You when you start following James Burton, and then pretty soon you're listening to Emmylou Harris and all that stuff. And so I just and so I found all those bands back when I was still in college in France, like the Desert Rose Band, and there was this their first album had there was the band in front of this Palomino sign, and I was like, "Fuck, what is this? That can I capture in my imagination?" And then so I played music, doing some touring and clubs and stuff until I finished college. And then I started the animation career, like, and I moved to England and blah blah blah. And so music, and then when I was turning 30 almost, I want to say. So it was like, hey man, you're getting old, don't forget, if you don't, and so I got back into music big time. And so, but not, it was never for me, I never put the pressure on it to make enough money, to live or anything. It was just like, but because, so I just did it and I got to play and work with all those guys from the Palomino, all those guys that I learned to play, listening to their records or whatever. And I got to the guys I interviewed in the book. I get to know them, become friends with them. We work together, we hang out. They became part of my life, and I became just a little part of their tradition. And so to me, it was obvious that this could be an amazing place to do a neo-noir story, and also what that place represented. Uh, um, but yes, I have a lot of fondness for the place, for the time, for the people there, for the way of life, and also because there's a guy that I talk about who's passed away now a good 15 years ago, but his name was Archie Francis, um, who was the house drummer at the Palomino for 4 years, and who, by a complete fluke, because we got connected through this other guy, this whole story. That's a crazy story, actually. But this other guy called Elvis Covo. Have you heard of Elvis Covo?
I
Um,
haven't.
Elvis Covo was like a kind of child prodigy, pedal steel guitar player, who grew up in Memphis, and there are stories about him that he had taught Elvis how to play the guitar and stuff like that. And then he came to California, was kind of sort of like a loose part of the Wrecking Crew, worked on the
Okay.
Million, he played with Elvis Coe. Anyways, lovely, lovely guy. And so one night I'm going with this other friend. I'm gonna stop with the name dropping because it's annoying. But I this who's a really way, way better musician, not even on the same planet than me. But we go to listen to Elvis Covo play with his jazz band out in the West Valley in this little joint called KC that looks like it's straight out of the Big Lebowski. And so my friend sits with them, and I'm talking to Al. And I'm like, hey, Al, what's this story about you teaching Elvis how to play the guitar? And he goes like, oh, well, when I was in Memphis, I was a kid, living in the projects, and me and my buddy, Billy Burnett, I'm like, wait, what did you just say? Yeah, me and my buddy Billy Burnett, would have those jam sessions, and this kid Elvis would come out, and he always wanted to sit in, but he sucked. So we'd never let him sit. So I had to show him a few things on the guitar just so he could sit in with us. And then he tells me, and then one day I get the call from Sun Records, and it's Bill Black, right, who's Elvis's bass player, and says, "Hey, Al, we're going to cut these sides at Sun Record with that stupid kid Elvis, just me and Scotty on guitar, and how about you on steel? You wanna play with us?" And Al said, "Guys, I don't play on that three-chord shit." So so I'm sitting with this guy, and he's like, hey, who are you playing with at the time? And I'm like, oh, well, was the band that just broke up. And so it was like, well, I know a guy who's looking for a guitar player. I was like, who? And he goes like, Archie Francis. You know Archie Francis? I was like, no. He was the house drummer of the Palomino for 40 years. And then, in his older age, didn't really like didn't want to drum anymore. So he turns out he was this insane songwriter. Like he had a book this thick of incredible songs that are just poetry, pure poetry, cowboy poetry. Anyways, and so it turns out he lived 200 yards from my house. So we became friends. We started playing, and I played maybe 150 shows with him. I don't know. It became a thing. But then he passed away, unfortunately. But the point is that in Archie's days, which is like 60s, 70s, 80s, you could be a house drummer at the Palomino, do a few sessions here and there and stuff like that, and make a good living in LA, buy a house up here, raise your family and stuff like that. It was, and that you were a working musician, in that way, and that doesn't exist anymore, right? And so it became super clear to me that the working musician, that type of a working musician, um, and of course, they're still professional musicians, right? But I'm talking about that particular type of working musician. Um, they were like the canary in the coal mine for what happened to the American middle class in the last 40 years. And so Palomino, in a way, became also, there's that in the background, that it's never really a point in the story, but it's all alive in every part of it, you know. So that's the music thread to me.
Very cool. Hmm.
You lay down so many names that I don't know. You're gonna have to send me an emailed list,
Yeah.
or just a playlist.
Well, Archie Francis was just a great guy, and I got to produce his final because he worked on a million with a million people. Talk about Johnny Cash. He did play with Johnny Cash. He did play with Roger Miller. He played with all those guys. I mean, he played anybody who walked through the PAL. If they didn't have their band with them, the house band would play. But why am I saying this? Lost my train of thought on Archie. Oh, so he was writing all these songs and he like recorded like a track or two here and there, but he never really did an album. And I got to help him produce his album before he passed away, and which has some incredible people playing on it, which has Al Bruno. Al Bruno was also one of the top guitar players in town here in his day. He was Dick Clark's band leader and whatever, and he was on the album, and that's the last recorded thing Al Bruno ever did, and that's also his. He also passed on, so it was like yeah, it's a very personal project that is deceptively stream of consciousness. It's actually very constructed because after like 40 years of doing this shit, I cannot write something that doesn't somehow get structured the old-fashioned way we always do it, But it's you read it and I don't think you're feeling the structure. I think you're feeling the moments, and a lot of them are very lived in. A lot of them are, one way or the other,
Is that Money in the Bank, the name of the album?
Yeah, money at the bank. Yeah, in the bank.
Okay.
It's funny at his funeral, because the song. So his daughter, one of his daughters, spoke at the funeral and said, "Hey, his favorite song was 'I Don't Want to Die with Money in the Bank.' Guess what? Mission accomplished." Uh, you know, he was such a character.
But speaking
All
of
right.
music,
Now I know what I'm listening to tomorrow
you
in the hallways.
you mentioned that there are things in this that, like, as they pass by, you just don't understand, but you kind of deal with it. And
Mm.
I had actually written down one thing, and I'm like,
Oh,
this is probably too obscure to even ask about. But as
okay.
we're on music, there's a point where they're getting ready to go out and play at the Palomino. And one of the guys, the guy who's playing the bass, says London will not be calling it's Union Avenue.
Yeah,
I assume you know what that means. What does
sure.
that mean?
Well, so, as you know, London Calling is the Clash,
Sure.
right? And so, and Union Avenue is the street that Sun Records was on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the guy is basically telling him, "Hey man, you're not gonna play any of that wild shit, right? We're doing it old style."
Less of the rock and more of the Billy going on this evening,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. That's right.
Very cool.
See,
Maybe everybody else knew that. I did not know that.
I didn't, but
But
just
that's the thing, right?
just
It's just like you want those things that you get what he's saying, you get
Yep.
the vibe, but the specifics you may or may not know, and you may or may not chase them, or but that's what makes the world feel like it has a life on its own.
Absolutely.
I just I've brought up a few times on the podcast that my family has a movie club that we get together once a week and talk about a movie, and it was actually my week to pick. And serendipitously, I guess, the movie I picked this week was Jim Jarmusch's Mystery Train. So like as soon as you said Sun Records, I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
no. I was literally listening to the Sun singles in the hallway. Actually, I put together a playlist of all of the Sun and Stax singles. So I had random Sun and Stax singles going on in the hallway. It
That's
was my
amazing.
Memphis playlist
That's amazing.
today.
I'll
Um,
tell you something, and maybe we can end on that because believe it or not, I have to go back to work.
well,
Uh,
I got to ask closing questions really quick, but say that, and then we'll
oh, okay,
end
okay.
on yeah.
What's really interesting? I mean, I love that movie, Mystery Train, right? It's with this Japanese people don't know, right? This Japanese tourist, like he and the it's a couple, young couple, and he's rockabilly, so
Right.
um, so it's in a way a movie about cultural appropriation,
Yeah.
about what when you have a culture like America, had that resonates throughout the world, you will be everywhere, but there's a level to which you will never be understood anywhere.
Right.
And so growing up in France in those years, 70s, I was a little kid in 70s, but 80s mainly, um, you you lived in a cultural suburb of America. And when you're in that and you fall in love, just like the kid in Mystery Train, you fall in love with some of the aspects of it. Oh, I love but it's the surface thing. You don't understand really, like, you're because you're not, and why should you? You live in a different country, but you've been marketed that culture, you've accepted it, and now you're doing kind of your own thing with it in a weird way. So, like me, who had this weird desire from an early age that I cannot explain to live in America, to be an American, to just there was something that spoke to me here. Um, a lot of my journey has been like I don't want to do it fake. I don't want to do it like it's cultural appropriation. I don't want to be that Japanese kid in Mystery
So you
Train.
got to give him credit for liking Carl Perkins so much.
Yeah, I love copper, right? I went to be here and plant my roots, and that the roots would extend culturally to where I could write a story like Palomino, and it would absolutely be lived in and not be the Palomino that I would have written 30 years ago when I lived in France.
All right, closing questions so that you can go back to work because you're a crazy man. Um, and because you're on the West Coast, so it's a little bit earlier for you. Um, I don't need to give the whole spiel because I've given it to you before, but like this podcast and being involved in comics has like changed my life in wonderful and marvelous ways. I get to have surreal experiences like this conversation. Um, on a regular basis, like in a way that if you told me when I was a kid or even 30 something that, oh, this is going to be part of your life, I would have been like, yeah, fuck you. um, so I've started collecting surreal experiences. Tell me something that you have gotten to experience because of this life in cartoons and comics,
There's
um,
there's
and
definitely
music. I
well,
mean, you kind of just gave us one.
well, there's so many on the animation movie side that I could, but I don't want to drop them because that would be name dropping in a way that I don't want to do. But let me just say that yes, there's some rooms that I found myself in and that I just like the 8-year-old me was floating on the ceiling like, how is this real? But musically, I'll give you a near miss that since we've been talking a lot about Archie. Um, Archie, like to hang out at because we recorded Archie's record at Pete Anderson's studio. I don't know if you know who Pete Anderson is. He was Dwight Yoakam's original guitar player and producer, and then they start working together. But Archie is the one who introduced Dwight to Pete. and put them together, and the rest is history, right? So we
Wow.
recorded the album at Pete's studio in Burbank, and so Archie liked to hang out there, and one night he calls me and he says, "Hey man, do you want? I'm going to Pete's studio. Do you want to come and hang out? Maybe it'll be like a little jam session, and it'll be really fun to And I'm like, and I was working at Disney at the time, and I can't remember if I was working overtime or I had a long day. I was just like, Archie, I'm just gonna pass. And then he goes, he calls me back the next day, and he says, "Man, you missed out." I was like, "What are you talking about?" And like we had, Pete had Billy Gibbons in the studio, and we
Oh,
jammed all night long. And I was like, "Oh, fuck."
oh,
I've been watching Billy Gibbons videos just earlier today. That guy
Yeah.
is amazing. It's
Oh my God. And I never met him. And then I never met him. But then there you go. I could have met him,
you
be a
know,
fly on the wall, maybe pick up a guitar, a little bit for 5 minutes and myself, I don't know. But it would have been like definitely a bucket list sort of like, what do you call it? Surreal experience. Yeah.
Right?
yeah.
That didn't happen. Sometimes they don't happen, but.
No, I mean, there's something surreal about like knowing somebody who you can say, "Oh, I talked to them and they told me, 'Hey, you know how you had work last night? Well, sucks to be you.'"
Yeah.
as,
Yeah, yeah.
as a
And
note, by the way, as a guy from North Dakota, talking to somebody who's worked at Disney and is, animating movies and doing all of this is similar to the Billy Gibbons experience, probably. And it's like we don't have a lot of people hanging out at Disney here in North Dakota, so it's
Uh,
pretty cool. It seems like the
yeah,
the
yeah.
things you've been
No, no.
able to do are
When I
crazy
found out
awesome.
that you worked on Iron Giant, I was like, "Oh, my
oh yeah,
childhood
yeah,
Nice.
yeah, yeah.
and my kids' childhood."
You know,
That was a multi-generational movie in my house.
You know, it's really weird because I have this one memory of like when we were in the middle of it, and like the release was 6 months away or something, and we were still working, and I was looking at the first scenes in color and stuff like that, and I was like, cannot wait until the world sees this. And there was like 6 months. We have to wait 6 months. I cannot believe. And that was 30 years ago.
All right. I always make you answer this question multiple times just because I like to get your music recommendations too. Tell me something you love, preferably storytelling or preferably comics, but we don't have rules. Preferably storytelling, but we don't have
Oh no,
rules.
that's
Something that
something
you
I know about.
love that not enough people around you know about.
Know about.
Yeah.
Hmm,
And I need a music rec too. So comic and
okay.
music.
Um, okay, I'm gonna start with music first.
Okay.
I'm going to, I think, and it's really having a comeback because I mean, as you guys know, in Palomino, Eddie plays the pedal steel guitar at the Palomino. The real pedal steel guitar player at the Palomino was my pal JD Menes, who's just incredible musician. There's so much soul in everything he does, and he has a sound when he plays the steel, like the type of chords that he does that is completely unique. Like no one else does it like him. It's you can if you hear him in the track, so if people don't know who JD Menez is, Meness, uh um look him up. There's a lot of him, I'm sure, on YouTube, and look for records that he's on. It's music that is
JDJAYDEE.
yeah. So in some places that's the right way to do it, but sometimes people just write JD because they don't know any better. So you
No,
just
I know. I wrote just JD and it
yeah, yeah.
corrected me.
So I would say, because I think let's not go after like artists who have record. Let's go after sidemen and musicians that are extraordinary and that maybe people don't know about because they're behind the scenes. So go look up JD. He's amazing. Uh,
Okay. I just did.
And in terms of comics, um, man, I don't know if I should go back to the old days or where should I go that not enough people know about. Okay, I'm gonna do a sort of because you mentioned Metal Hurlant earlier. So as we all know, Metal Hurlant were started by like three or four people, right? There was like Dione, who was like the publisher, the editor in chief, whatever. There was this guy Farkas, who was the money guy, and then the artists were Mobius and Drouillet. And I think people by now in America know Mobius enough. I have the maybe the only one of the very, very few pieces of original art that I own is like above my desk. It's a Batman by Mobius, a little sketch. Uh, um, its own story. It's a story for a different. But
That's insane.
the but the other so like it's like you had the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, right? So Mobius was the Beatles, and you had the Rolling Stones, like the darker side was Drouillet. And Drouillet would
Lone
write this
Sloan.
big ass, yeah, Lone Sloan, right? Delirious, all that stuff, The Night. And when you look at his space stuff, like the whole Lone Sloan, I think Delirious is part of Lone Sloan or it's
Yeah.
whatever. Um, a lot of the imagery for the Galactic Empire in Star Wars is inspired
Oh
by,
yeah.
like even the helmet, the all that, that
Mhm.
stuff, yeah, like the Darth Vader, the whole sort of space Nazi kind of vibe that is done in a way that's also not obvious. It's obvious it's what it is, but not in a cliched way that is very, very, very inspired. So like when you watch Star Wars, um, I think a lot of the Jedi side is an alien, like random aliens, all that stuff is very inspired by Mobius and Mézières. And a lot of the who did Valerian, if people don't know, and a lot of the Empire, it's straight up Drouillet. And
Yeah.
Drouillet are always looked as a French guy trying to do Steve Ditko if Steve Ditko was trying to copy Kirby. And it came out,
Okay.
as its own fucking thing.
I,
And
I- it in our heavy metal book club, Dylan is a massive Gale fan.
yeah.
When we were going through the issues where Gale was serialized, it was his favorite story every month. And it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Yep.
Um, so Stefan, it is always a pleasure. I love having excuses to have you come talk.
No, it's my
I
pleasure. It's great.
I
It was
loved
really
it. I loved an opportunity to actually take Palomino out for a spin in our Pulp Blotter book club. It's kind of cool to take a book that I not only love that much, but by a creator who I consider a friend, and like introduce it to more people and go through the whole defending my friend, damn it. And you're making valid criticism, even though I don't agree.
I mean, like it's art, It's just like
Yeah.
everybody's point of view is valid. Everybody's
Yeah.
experience is the worst thing is someone not having an experience,
Right.
and
Actually, that's going to be my last quick question because like I was almost afraid to ask you to talk with the group because there'd been like more criticism that we sometimes get into. Like we had to stop our run of reading Jimmy Palmiotti's Jonah Hex because we felt like we'd fallen into the Chris Farley show. Remember issue 42? That was awesome. um so like the fact that there was so much back and forth, I'm like, I don't want anybody to get upset. But like when you responded, you like not only responded that you were down for it, but you'd listen to the episodes. You're like, oh yeah, no, this isn't necessarily going to be easy, but I'm all over it.
Um,
So like what's it like listening to your work be stripped apart in podcast form?
that's what I do for a living. I mean, dude, I work in movies, it's if I had, out of the 35 years doing it, I think 34 and a half is like compiled time of people telling me what I'm doing wrong. That that's the job, So
That's
trust me,
fair.
I
That's
think
fair.
people who took the time to took the trouble to read this book, which is very long, and that some people it connected with some people, it didn't connect with other people. Dude, I'm down. I'm here for the conversation.
Right. Right. Well, I think we all connected on some level.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think,
Dan actually, I think, binged the whole thing immediately.
I absolutely, I mean, I love film noir and I love the old detective stuff and I love like basically everything about this really connected well with me. What was interesting, I think, was once we sat down and really started going through it more and you start analyzing the specifics, you did interesting different things, and different things sometimes hit people weird. You weren't
Right.
approaching comics in entirely the traditional way. And I think that's what made it fun and gave us some things to sort of dig into and sort of question our own, well, how do I feel about reading comics as a two-page spread instead of
Yeah.
the way I've been doing it for
Right.
40 years.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
yeah.
And the other thing that I'll say too is that I just remember like when I was younger and buying CDs, right? Music CDs, right? And so I just remember like being when I lived in England, in London, I was a kid, I was a kid, I was young, it was my first job, and every Saturday I would go to Soho, like to the Big Tower Records or whatever they had, and I looked at, and you couldn't quite listen, you had to look at the covers, and so, and I'd get like 4 or 5 CDs and bring them back, to my apartment, on the other side of London. And then I would like listen to and see what I got, right? And the stuff that I was like, put it in and like, this is awesome, right? I'd be bored of it
Mhm.
many time, and the stuff that I would go like, that's a little bit weird. I'll listen to the other stuff, right?
Yep.
That becomes so you never know, like
Yeah.
your relationship that we all have with artistic material changes because we change, we see things differently. There's stuff that resonate with us, that connect with our experience at some points, that at some other times it doesn't. It's also good, so part of the that's all the
Yeah,
fun.
I actually completely adore that type of album. Like I remember REM had a 4 album run after Monster where I didn't like a single one of them on the first listen, but I loved them all by the third.
Yeah, yeah,
You
and then that's
know.
all you're listening to. So there you go.
That's
Yeah.
that's where
Yeah.
I'm at with the new Stones album,
Oh
That's
yeah.
what's already.
the
Say
new
again.
Rolling Stones album.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
First time I listened to it, I was like, I don't know. But then I've listened to it a couple more times, and
Mhm.
it's
yeah. You
got some favorites.
No,
yeah.
Favorite comic book?
actually, for me, the all-timer for that is still Ben Folds' Lonely Avenue, which
Oh.
Nick Hornby did all the writing on. Um, and Nick Hornby is one of my, or all the lyrical writing. Nick Hornby is one of my favorite writers, and I love Ben Folds. So, like, immediately, I'm like, I'm going to love this album. And I hated it the first listen
Yeah.
because it didn't feel like a Ben Folds album.
Right, right.
And then I realized, oh, wait a minute. What it does feel like is a Nick Hornby album if Nick Hornby could make music rather than just write words. It's got that Memphis Lonely Avenue feel to it. It's got more of the 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 blues and it's not just your typical piano album.
Yeah, yeah,
And like each listen after that, it just grew on me. And now it's
yeah.
one of my favorite albums by anybody. Um,
It's a
So
living thing.
it's always weird like that sometimes. Sean, who's playing drums for the Stones on the new album?
So there's a couple of people. There's one track that is using the last track that Charlie laid down.
Okay.
Um, I know McCartney's on bass on one of the songs.
Okay.
Um,
Because I mean, we brought up
Ringo came to a session, but he didn't play drums.
right. We brought up the Stones and the Beatles earlier for Mobius and Drew A. So since they came up again, like I don't know how you can have such great bands with among the best drummers in history, and both of the drummers are criminally underrated. Criminally
Gentlemen,
underrated.
Well, look, I was
Yeah.
talking to Mark,
We got to let Stefan go.
Oh.
For 22 panels, this has been Stephan Franck. Stephan Franck,
that's me.
and we will
And,
see you
And so I
after
just,
the next page.
it's not the thing where I need to stay on so we're live or we're whatever. I can just log off and you're good to go, right?
Yeah, we're going to stop recording right now.